Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining another episode of the Educational Leadership Podcast. We have Dr. Allen, Superintendent Dr. Allen from Marble Falls ISD. So very excited to have him as a guest. But before we get into the interview, we want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact's giving hundreds of millions of dollars in funding to school districts around the great state of Texas, a virtual endowment that doesn't involve taxpayers or the government. And so if your district needs higher teacher salaries or whatever the district needs, reach out to Ideal Impact. We have our co-host, Corinne French. Corinne, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here. Can't wait to get started.
Yes. And Dr. Allen, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And before we get into the interview, if you can, share a little bit about your background.
Well, my background. So I did most of my public school learning in Escambia County, Florida, of all things, and then moved to Texas halfway through my senior year. Long story. I won't go into it. And then became a teacher and taught in the Birdville Independent School District for 8 years, was an assistant principal in the Colleyville Heritage High School and the Grapevine Colleyville Independent School District for 2 years. Spent 2 years writing curriculum at the University of Texas while I was earning my doctorate. Served in the Midway Independent School District for 4 years, 3 of those as high school principal, 1 as assistant superintendent, a deputy superintendent in Lake Travis after that. Did that for 3 years, and I have been in Marble Falls ISD as the superintendent for 8 years.
Wow. Now that is an impressive background right there. You have a lot of experience. So this is going to be an exciting interview. What I imagine with everything, you've experienced in public ed, you've probably been involved in a lot of different things. Right now, what are you passionate about in public ed?
I'm passionate about all of it, I got to tell you. And we could talk about a number of different things. I would tell you one of the things that I think I spend the most time thinking about and in trying to help advance the discussion around is social emotional learning and the relationship between social emotional learning and academic performance. And so that's an area that I see us needing to really grow and develop in, and an awareness that we're going to need to really deepen, both for policymakers as well as parents, if we're going to really help our kids grow into being future-ready students who are able to reach their fullest potential academically, emotionally, socially, and in the world that requires higher levels of teamwork and collaboration than ever before.
Love it. Love it. And for those listening in, could you kind of give the definition of social emotional learning?
Yeah, social emotional learning basically does a number of different things, but it focuses on teaching students at the early ages, especially the social skills that they need to be able to interact in a world appropriately. So how to truly actively listen, how to advocate for yourself without doing that in ways that are combative, how to be assertive and have strong feelings and emotions and opinions without necessarily handling those in ways that lead to discord. And then as students get older and older, what that social emotional learning begins to transition into is self-management, self-discipline, being able to know and recognize other people's strengths and abilities and how to communicate in ways that lead to collaboration, not conflict. It has a lot to do with helping students understand the relationship between mental health and wellness and physical health and wellness and the ability to be fully prepared as academic learners. It helps them build resilience and grit. When people are aware of how to manage their own emotions and process the emotions of others, it decreases the likelihood that they adopt a victimhood mentality while also increasing their ability to self-advocate in ways that are peaceful and productive.
Gary, that was such a good call to ask for Dr. Allen to explain a little bit about social emotional learning. I think it's no surprise then when I looked at your district webpage and saw your mission statement, Dr. Allen, that it mentions for our viewers, I want to read just a minute of it. Marble Falls ISD has an unyielding commitment to love every child and inspire them to achieve their fullest potential. I mean, you use the word love in your mission statement. That's pretty bold and brave, actually, for me. I don't know how many districts actually use the word love. And I would love, without using that word too much, love to know and understand what makes Marble Falls different and what you are doing. Obviously, your background has brought them to this space to be able to do it, but what are some unique things you're doing in Marble Falls related to social emotional learning?
Well, I'll tell you some of what we're doing. I'll let others decide if it's unique. If you want me to unpack that word love and what we mean by it, I can do that as well. But I'm gonna answer the question you asked me. So we have social emotional learning curriculum that is embedded in our school day that starts with kids in pre-K and goes all the way up through grade 12.
Wow.
And within that, we cover some of the topics I was mentioning before, all the way from how to listen to how to deal with complex conflicts in ways that drive conversations toward peaceful and productive resolution without compromising your own values and beliefs. Mm-hmm. So that's a full range of things we do within the school day. We have social emotional coordinators on every single one of our campuses that are responsible for a couple of different things. And one is helping to make sure that that curriculum is developed and implemented with fidelity. And in addition to that, when we find students who are struggling with self-regulation, who are struggling with issues of mental health, who are struggling with emotional wellness, they can work with those students either individually or in small groups to help them get back on track, get stabilized, and get back into the classroom. I'll give you an example. Every one of our elementary schools has something we call a peace path. If we have students who are dysregulated, our social emotional coaches can reach that student, get them to walk the peace path. Takes about, 90 seconds, sometimes 2 minutes, helps them engage in a set of physical and mental tasks that sort of does a reset and get them right back in the classroom. So instead of them becoming disruptive in a way that leads to a behavioral challenge that gets them sent to the office and then we're calling mom and dad and telling them that the student has misbehaved, we actually just reset them, get back in class, and away we go. We do the same thing as adults. We just don't call it that. When we start to get frustrated or agitated, we go to the coffee pot for a minute, or we walk to the water cooler, or we get up and we pace around the office for a minute. Different people have different strategies they employ, and they kind of learn those organically over time. We're finding it's more and more important to teach students to manage that stuff in ways that are productive, because if not, it comes out in the form of behaviors that undermine the student's success and frankly can undermine the success of students around them. And then we have a district level person to whom those social emotional behavior coordinators reports. And then in addition to that, we have a team of folks who come together and check our progress around that effort so that we can track whether or not our program is actually having any effectiveness. So that is in a nutshell what we do. It maps to a bunch of other work as well. They intersect with the sort of academic school counselors, which is what I think people think of when you say school counselor, that academic side. They interface with them to help make sure our students who are most at risk are being successful as they move forward. And if not, things that we can do to put supports for them. Wraparound services, we interact with social workers, we interact with support services in the community so that we can even support whole families in terms of becoming healthier. So we work on a whole lot of things there that try and provide our kids not only what they need here within the school day, but actually trying to extend those services beyond the school as well.
This is cool. This is really neat. So this isn't something that comes up much on the podcast, and it's definitely needed, because you think about it, like from an academic perspective, you can learn a lot and have a lot of knowledge, but if you can't effectively communicate and listen and understand and be challenged a little bit, it's it's very difficult to be successful in any kind of relationship. So I think that's really cool. I'm kind of curious. You mentioned the correlation between the victim mindset and the social emotional learning. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, and I want to be careful about how I use some of this terminology because it can be a trigger point for certain people. But oftentimes what we see with students who struggle is they begin to think the whole world's against them, and they begin to feel hopeless, and they begin to feel powerless. And in some ways, if we're not careful, we reinforce that belief when we feel sorry for students. We want to empathize and we want to make an emotional connection. But the second we begin to feel sorry for a kid in a way that communicates that without us, they can't be successful, we rob them of their power and we rob them of their efficacy. And we rob them of their ability to understand that they can affect the world around them in a way that allows them to have a path to success. And so I don't ever want our students to come out of school thinking that the circumstances in their life that are creating challenges for them makes them a victim. What it actually does is give them an opportunity to develop a skill set that can map to resilience that gives them a leg up compared to some people who've never really had to face adversity. Challenge can be an opportunity for growth if we can help that challenge be manageable for students and then give them supports that they need to overcome those challenges. And so what we need is young people entering the world who are not expecting people to hold their hand through every difficult thing, but who believe in themselves enough to know that they have the skill set and the personal strength and resilience to be able to push through things. Ask for help when you need it, but then get it done, whatever it is. Fight for your marriage, get the job done at work, stand tall in the name of helping your kids grow. We need people who know how to confront the challenges of the world in ways that build peace, build cooperation, but have a clear direction in the path of success.
Love it. Now this is so cool. That particular mindset that we're trying to overcome through the social emotional learning, do you feel like that's more of an environmental factor, or their home life, or genetic, or or maybe that's kind of a too far in left field of a question. I mean, what do you think?
Well, I want to be careful. I'm an educational expert-ish, like I'm Dr. Allen, but we're intersecting with fields that are really over my pay grade. What I will tell you from my experience is that there are a number of factors that can contribute to that, right? And so you mentioned some of them. It can be in-school factors, in fact, in the way that we relate to students, frankly. Sometimes the most well-intentioned individuals, if they are not careful, will begin to solve a student's problem for the student instead of teach the student how they can solve the problem. And there are times that's appropriate. Sometimes challenges are too big for kids and we need to plow some of those out of the way. But we should always be asking ourselves, how can we help this student overcome this using what they have instead of just taking away from them the productive struggle, right? Sometimes it is home and environmental factors. Sometimes it's cultural. There are things in societies that can contribute to this idea that kids can't overcome, that people cannot overcome. Can't's a pretty toxic word, frankly. And so, we want our kids to know when to ask for help and to ask for it. But we also want them to understand that asking for help is part of the process of overcoming a challenge. And so there's a little bit of a balance there. I don't want to go too far afield and make it seem as though what we're trying to do is raise a generation of young people who don't ever know when to stop and ask for help or when to call in additional resources. But we just want them to know that it's within their power to do that, and they don't have to wait for someone to rescue them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Corinne, was there something you wanted to ask there?
Well, I know you mentioned, so the word love is in your mission statement, and
yes,
then
ma'am.
You say heart. The second paragraph says the heart of service put forth by all district stakeholders. My goodness, I cannot wait to hear more about that. You said you'd talk about that. Go ahead and talk about that.
Well,
you did answer the question. Thank you. But let's talk about that. I
appreciate that you voiced an appreciation. I'm using the word appreciation twice now, but that you voiced that you think that word's courageous. I do too, actually. And that was written by our school board and myself. It was probably 3 or 4 months after I was hired here. And I want to be very clear that when we talk about love, we're not talking about some Disney version of everything's kind and easy and this gentle road with babbling brooks and bunnies all along the side. We feel like when we say we want to love every student, what we mean by that is blend high expectations with high levels of support that loves a child so much that we refuse to allow them to be anything less than the absolute best they were created to be. And so it is a blend of expectation and accountability. Some of the people who loved me the most in my life growing up were the people who were also the fastest and most willing to hold me accountable. In other words, every now and then, Dad would have to straighten me out if I was acting like a knucklehead. Or every now and then, I'd have a coach who'd say, you're going to run extra because you're not giving your best effort. They pushed me to be my absolute best. They were also the first ones to give me a hug and give me a pat on the back and tell me when things were going well. This is what we mean by love. We're not looking at it through this. It would be wrong to think that when we say that we're loving all of our kids, that every day is candy and roses. That's not reality. And that robs kids of the perspective they need to have in order to be successful in a world that brings with it challenges each and every day. But we do love them. And we're the only place I know of in the state of Texas that says, as part of our vision statement, we're going to love every child. A lot of people talk about lifelong learning and a love of learning and all that. And I think the reason more districts don't do that is, one, because I think they take it for granted. Well, of course we love the kids. I would challenge that. Some kids are harder to love than others. And we need to make sure we're holding ourselves accountable for not letting noise and interference get in the way of our mission to love kids. The other thing I would say is this. It is a word that for some people is loaded. We took on the challenge of using that word and then clearly defining it with our teachers and clearly defining it with our community way that helps them understand exactly what we mean, so that the word is a word of powerful production, not toxicity. And so we're unashamed about that. We're going to love every single kid. The kids who get in trouble, the kids who do things we wish they wouldn't do, the kids who come with challenges, we're going to love them with all the passion that we love the easy to teach kids who are just, smiles and rainbows every day. We're going to love all of them. It's a moral imperative, and that's how we come at it.
Every time we have a podcast, sometimes it's to someone I know and sometimes it's not. And it's always wonderful to host these and co-host these with Gary. I did notice that about yours. And I use the word, and you use the word courageous. It is courageous. One of my core values, the core values exercise of define your core values. I help students do that at my university level job. And when I talk to them, it's really hard to come down to picking words because we want to be defined by many different things. But if you have to pick two core values, and one of mine is beauty, and it has nothing to do with jewelry or fun glasses or dresses for those people who know my style. Beauty to me means when I watch a student interacting with another student and they learned American Sign Language, they could communicate to that student. And I know that student didn't need to learn that language, but I watched them do it. When I walk on campus and I see that is beauty. And so for me, beauty when I clearly define beauty, it makes sense of why that's one of my core values. So I love that you all had that courage. I mean, I'm just commend you for that. For our listeners, if you take a look at district's mission statements, I don't know that you will find it in any other district. I've been Googling them and researching them for quite a while. And so I commend you on that. I know Gary's going to want to ask a final question, but I'm going to sneak a final question in because I know we're running short on time. Would you tell us something that you're reading right now? Give our listeners who are lifelong learners a few homework assignments. Give us some of your authors or thought leaders that you enjoy.
Author, that's a lot. So right now, I'm currently reading a book called The Heart of Leadership by Mark Miller. It's an old one. I'm also, I'm reading, it's called Jesus Before Judaism. It's about Christianity during Second Temple Judaism. It's kind of it's its own book and it's its own way, but it is extraordinarily thought-provoking. I'm actually also reading a number of articles. It's not a particular specific author, but about how to channel the power of diversity to help your communities become more effective and powerful. One of the phrases we're using around here a whole lot is diverse community under one vision, and that vision's our vision statement. And so that's some of the things I'm reading just right off the top of my head. Brene Brown, I just got through finishing her latest book. I cannot tell you how often I have started using the phrase clear as kind. God, I love that. Sure. I love that.
Me too.
She has 1,000 other just sticky language that you just grab onto and you think, man, why didn't I think of that? But she's great. We love her. And we love talking about the courage of humility and vulnerability. Oh my gosh, you cannot be a strong leader if you can't communicate with people in ways that they're very transparent, and you have to make yourself less if you're ever going to make someone else more. And so all of that kind of wraps together.
Make yourself
Love
less
it.
if you're going to make someone more. That sounds like Ravi. We had a guest on a few months ago. It sounds like Ravi's book, actually. So we'll have to make sure when we have a mastermind or something we do in the spring, make sure we make a connection. And I know Gary is going to want to ask the last question, I'm sure.
Yeah, but on that same note, we are looking at a digital education conference in the spring. So we'll be looking for speakers. So Dr. Allen may be reaching out to you, just so you know. Okay, last question. Who do you know in public education that should come on here and tell their story? Who do you know? Kind of a shout out a little bit, who?
Yeah, so Dr. David Young of Abilene ISD is brilliant and empathetic and cares deeply about kids and has had opportunities in his career to work in districts that might be described by those who don't really know what we do every day as easy. And he constantly chooses the challenge, constantly. And he's shaped my thinking quite a bit. And he's the current sitting superintendent. There is a retired superintendent, I don't know, Dr. Brad Lancaster, who's a huge influence on the way that I think about leadership, especially as it relates to the human connection piece. And then another very recently retired superintendent who, you talk about clear as kind, this superintendent was modeling this way of thinking about leadership long before it was written about by Brene Brown, and that is Dr. Robin Ryan. Just retired from the Grapevine Colleyville Independent School District. And never have I met a person who can tell you how the cow ate the cabbage with such kindness that Dr. Ryan can kind of, he caught me early in my career. I worked for him when he was a principal and I was an assistant principal and I was a newbie. And every now and then he had to, I talk about that accountability, he had to set me straight. And every time I walked out of the office after a session of being redirected, I'd think, man, I love that guy. What a gift to be able to kind of chew someone out a little bit and them feel so loved in the process. And so just one of the best. And so those are a couple I know who I think are just fantastic. Holly Morse-Kuntz, current superintendent, Dripping Springs ISD. Phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Has a unique story of her own and is one of our really strong female superintendents in the state of Texas. We've been underrepresented with that group, and she has stepped into that role with courage and done a great job bringing stability to a district that frankly hasn't had a lot. And speaking of super strong female superintendents, Susan Bone of Aledo ISD, high performing school district in the Fort Worth area, a non-traditional path to education, was trained as a lawyer. She was general counsel for Lake Travis ISD when I was there, and man, we could not have operated without her. And she's just the best. And so she's another one I think I would connect with. So those are all super strong superintendents sitting in the job. 2 of those retired, others not as much, but just great thought leaders who have a passion for kids and making sure that we remove the barriers to success. And so love all those folks.
Yes, thank you so much, because we're always looking to get thought leaders that are passionate about public education so we can get the good word out there. So thank you so much for that. Well, on that note, we're going to close out the podcast. Before we close out, we want to give a shout out again to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. They're giving hundreds of millions of dollars in the form of a virtual endowment to school districts. So if you need funding in the next 90 days, reach out to Ideal Impact. And for those of you that have been tuning in, stay tuned for future episodes of the Educational Leadership Podcast.